If you struggle to get your design decisions approved by stony-faced business types on the other end of video calls, then this video is for you. Because as a group of creative types, we are collectively, as a group, absolutely diabolical at communicating our ideas to people we're working with. So I'm about to show you the exact system I use to justify every single design decision. So you can back it up with evidence, get it over the line, and walk out of the room with your stylus held high. Let's go. So why do good designers lose creative battles? Well, we lose them not because our work is bad, although sometimes that could be the case, but we mostly lose them because we can't communicate a bulletproof case for them. So let's say you've done everything right on a project, right? You've understood the brief, you've gone away and given it loads of thought, done loads of research, and now you've put together this perfect little design that solves the problem. Away it goes, you deliver it to the client, and now you're sitting in an approval meeting and one of them says, "Why did you choose this color?" And you just say, "Because it looks good." Now that's a basic example, but saying something looks good isn't a defense. It's an opinion. And in a room full of decision makers who all have their own opinions, the loudest voice tends to win, not necessarily the best design opinion. This is when we find ourselves in design by committee territory. And these committees don't want your opinion, they want proof. You're dealing with very analytical thinkers, and you're the emotional thinker in the room. So you're going to butt heads with each other. That much is pretty much inevitable. These people only really need to know three things. They need to know, why did you make the decision you've made? How does it support the business goals? And what evidence do you have that it will work at all? And if you can't answer those questions with a certain amount of clarity and confidence and pep, they're going to override you. Not because they're trying to be difficult, but because they need to justify this decision to their boss or their boss's boss or some board or somebody holding the purse strings. And this is our dilemma, right? We know the design we've put together is right. We've considered the user, the business goals, the brand, all of that kind of stuff. But as soon as someone questions you on what you've done, you freeze because you don't have a system for defending your work. You're relying on instinct and taste, which are all perfectly valid, but they're not persuasive to a bunch of people who don't think like you. I recently saw a great video from Vin Yang, and in it he talks about how we're all driven by different things and how those things dictate how we communicate with people and how we respond to others who are communicating with us. So each of us human beings can be split into 4 colored categories. The first is red, and the red people are driven by power and results. The green people are driven by peace and stability. The blues by logic and structure, and the yellows by fun and connection. Now you might be like me and you're probably a yellow. So you're trying to communicate the fun and the creative side of your idea. And you're trying to do that to a bunch of people who only really care about bar charts and Excel formulas. So let's flip that on its head for a second and imagine that you're having a chat with a red person. They're trying to get you excited about a restaurant they've booked for both of you. And they start by banging on about how easy it's going to be to drive there, how convenient the parking is, all the awards the chef has won, all of the savings you're going to make by going on a Tuesday. They're trying to communicate all of the positive, measurable results you're going to achieve by going to this restaurant, when all you really care about is how much of a flavor explosion you're going to get inside your mouth. You're speaking two very different languages. And once you realize you're going to spend most of your life talking to people about creative decisions that have no interest in creative decisions, like the reds and the blues, you start to understand how you should be talking to them, and you can adjust your language accordingly. The real problem here isn't that these decision makers don't trust your judgment. It's that you're not providing sufficient evidence to them to help them trust it. You're speaking the language of design, they're speaking the language of business, so you're butting heads. The two of you need a translator. And that, my friends, is what my exact system looks like. Look at that. Look, I've even used the letters from the word exact to make a little acronym. What a wonderful world we live in. Okay, let's go through it. E is for empathize. Before you start getting into the world of defending your design, you need to understand what someone is really objecting to. Because most objections aren't necessarily about the design itself. They're about the fear and the uncertainty of the design not working. So to really get to the bottom of what those fears and uncertainties are, your job is to extract some emotional language from them that's going to help you address those problems. And you do this by placing 4 arseholes on a bench. Each arsehole represents a W, which is the beginning letter of a question. and then the benches itch for how. But essentially what I'm saying is you need to ask a load of questions. Delve into what exactly the emotion is that's causing the objection. Let's imagine you've just shown someone this hero image for a new orange juice brand's website and they say, "It feels empty. I'm worried people won't get it." You respond with, "Okay, tell me what you're worried they won't understand." They say, "Well, they won't understand what the product is." And you say, "Well, why is that important right now?" Because we're driving paid traffic here for the first time and we can't afford confusion. Empty space is not the problem here. The fear behind it, the fear of a lack of conversion, is the problem. You need to listen out for emotional language to understand where people are coming from. When someone mentions words like "I'm worried" or "I'm not confident" or "I'm scared," they're telling you the real reason. Your job isn't to dismiss that, it's to address it and empathize with it. Most people's default is to go into defensive mode with this kind of feedback, but your first port of call should always be empathizing. They need to know you're on their team and you're not completely dismissing whatever they'd come back with. This takes us on to X. Firstly, because I needed to shoehorn the X in somewhere. And secondly, because it stands for X-ray, because we're going to X-ray and diagnose the design principle that's causing the perceived problem. By identifying the design principle at play, you're helping reframe the problem. So is it a hierarchy thing, a contrast thing, a balance thing? The real concern that they've brought to our attention is people are not going to understand this fast enough. Now, the principles at play here are cognitive load and clarity of hierarchy. You can always say you're right to worry about clarity, especially with paid traffic, but adding more information above the fold can actually make comprehension worse, not better. Now you're no longer arguing taste back and forth. You're diagnosing a behavioral problem. Now remember, your job isn't to just appease the person you're working with by just bending over and accepting what their changes are. Your job is to fix their problem. And more often than not, your fix can seem counterintuitive to the person you're working with. And this is why we first need to figure out how to communicate their problem into a design principle so we can move forward from there. If the client says it feels empty, what they mean is, "I'm scared users won't get it." You know the principle at play here is the cognitive load. When they say, "Can we add more info?" what they mean is we need to increase understanding. And you know the principle here is possibly hierarchy or some improved copy. Now that you've reframed the problem and tied it to a specific design principle, we need to anchor that problem to a business outcome. Remember, most of these decision makers trust data and business logic more than they trust aesthetic judgment. So it's really important at this point that we connect our decisions to a specific business goal of theirs, whether it's conversion, engagement, retention, or awareness. And we can use user research and behavioral science to support those choices. They want to add more information into this little section, but you know the goal of this section isn't actually to explain everything. Now, in this project, we know that the business goal is to increase brand awareness. We also know that most users just skim read a hero section for 3 to 5 seconds before deciding if they're interested in it at all to keep exploring the site, which is why we've decided on a clear headline and a strong supporting visual to build intrigue and encourage them to read more. Now, this is the part of the design world where AI becomes your friend, because you need to drop some evidence on them at this point. And this is where AI is good at doing research into studies that have existed before. Now, this is where you discover that multiple usability studies in the past have proven that when you increase cognitive load, i.e. when you throw more information at somebody, especially above the fold on a website, conversion drops. People read less and they bounce faster. Now you've shifted the decision-making process. It's no longer about the aesthetics. It's about the operational effectiveness of the design. So here's where you really drive it home with the C for communicate. We've anchored our decision to one of their business goals and briefly explained it in a language they understand. But now we need to make it concrete by visually explaining it. Remember, these people don't speak design, right? So never use your design jargon on them. But you also shouldn't assume that they can still see the same thing you've got going on in your head. You need to show them in a way that they get it. And you do this by using analogies and comparisons. So here's an analogy for you, right? And imagine I'm speaking to you as a client here. Think of the homepage of your site like a shop window, not the entire shop. If you show one clear thing beautifully on the outside, it will intrigue people enough to come in and learn more. Whereas if you cram the window with absolutely everything you sell, no one's going to know what's going on and they won't understand what you're doing. They also will think you don't know how Windows work. And then when it comes to comparisons, you show them views of how the design looks before and after their proposed changes to further illustrate your point. You are the visual thinker. Often the people you're talking to are not. So just showing them visuals of analogies and visuals of actual comparisons really, really helps to drive the point home. You're also not patronizing here, you're educating. You're making future conversations easier because over time, they'll start to think more like you. They'll give better feedback and you'll spend less time justifying your work. And finally, the T is for test. Because when in doubt, you need to let the data decide. Testing removes all subjectivity from the equation. It's no longer your opinion versus theirs. It's raw, dirty data. And that, my friends, is the exact system. Let's run through it one more time very quickly. The E is for empathize. You are working as part of a team. You're no longer on your own. The person you're working for and you're part of a team. When they give you feedback, you listen, you show that you understand, they know that you're with them, and you're not just trying to push some arbitrary decision on them just so you have something nice to put in your portfolio. You're doing it because it's in their best interests. X-ray, you're diagnosing the actual design principle at play here that has prompted their feedback. You then anchor your decision to the business goal that they've got in mind. You communicate it effectively by using analogies they'll understand, visually where you can, and comparisons to your proposed design versus the one with their changes. Then you offer up the test. Test to show that you are more than happy with being wrong, as you should be, but let's put your design and their proposed changes to the test, see which one works. Because the only thing that matters here is what works. No one's ego is important. Always remember that you are most likely communicating with the red and blue folks. They only care about data, only care about results, logic, and structure, not creativity. So you need to adjust your language to more closely reflect theirs. Now that you've got that trick under your belt, the only thing that can stop you from absolutely taking over the world is if the client you're working with is unsure about their full branding strategy. And this video is going to show you how to completely nail that. So go watch that. Go.